Hello, welcome to the module on haiku. The objective of this module in your creative writing course is to introduce you to the form and philosophy behind this ancient Japanese art form so that you can adapt it to your own contemporary writing. Haiku often features an image or a pair of images meant to depict the essence of a specific moment in time. Due to the differences between Japanese and English, the structure of haiku is different in both languages. Haiku began in 13th century Japan as hoku, the opening phrase of renga, an oral poem generally 100 stanzas long, which was also composed syllabically. The much shorter haiku broke away from renga in the 16th century and was mastered a century later by Matsuo Basho. It was only in the 19th century that it eventually became known as haiku. The form has evolved. Many of its regular traits, including its famous syllabic pattern, have been routinely broken. However, the philosophy of haiku has been preserved. The focus on a brief moment in time, a use of provocative, colorful images, an ability to be read in one breath, and a sense of sudden enlightenment. The philosophy of haiku influenced the American poet Ezra Pound, who noted the power of its brevity and juxtaposed images. He wrote, "The image itself is speech. The image is the word beyond formulated language." It was Matsuo Basho in the 17th century who elevated the form of hoku and gave it a new popularity. He, as well as the school of poets who followed him, promoted standalone hoku by including them in their anthologies and thus giving shape to what is now considered as haiku. Basho was also instrumental in creating a subgenre of haiku called haibun, where he used his haiku-style verses as talk points within his short prose sketches and longer travel diaries. His best-known work, which is translated as Narrow Roads to the Interior, is counted as one of the classics of Japanese literature and has been translated into English extensively. The next famous style of haiku to arise was that of Yosa Buson, called the Tenmei style, after the Tenmei era in which it was created. As with many poets of his time, not much is known about the real Buson, but much of his poetry survives to this day. We do know that he moved to Edo, the region that we now know as Tokyo, when he was just 20 and began studying under the haiku master Hayano Hajin. The main historical influence for Buson was Matsuo Basho, and just like his idol did a century ago, Buson traveled extensively across Japan and wrote haiku, which he combined with paintings of his travels. Buson had a deep and complete understanding of humanism, and he produced a large body of work that made him one of the greatest of his era. Apart from haiku, Buson is recognized as one of the greatest masters of haiga, the art form where haiku is combined with a painting. Next of the great haiku masters after Basho and Buson is Kobayashi Issa. He's better simply known as Issa, which is his pen name that means cup of tea in Japanese. Issa was very individualistic, at the same time very humanistic kind of haiku writer. He drew on his own life experiences because he had a fairly miserable childhood and dealt with a lot of poverty, while at the same time being very devoted to the ideals of Buddhism, and this is all very evident in his poetry. The fact that he wrote about topics such as this made it very, very accessible to a wide audience, and he is primarily known for making the genre of haiku accessible to the common people. Issa wrote over 20,000 haiku, which is probably more than what the previous great masters before him have done, and this has won him readers up to the present day. Though his works were popular, he suffered great monetary instability. His poetry makes liberal use of local dialects and conversational phrases and includes many verses on plants and lower creatures. Here's a fun fact. Isa wrote 54 haiku on the snail, 15 on the toad, nearly 200 haikus on frogs, and about 230 on the firefly. And on we go, for a total of about 1,000 verses on such creatures. In the 19th century, we meet the last of our four great masters of haiku, Masaoka Shiki, who was a reformer and a modernizer. By the time he was writing, he felt that the haiku of the day had become stereotyped, trite, and hackneyed. Shiki was strongly influenced by Western culture. Like Buisson, he favored a painterly style and was particularly enamored of the European concept of plein air painting, which he adapted to create a style of haiku which can be described as a kind of nature sketch in words, an approach which later came to be called chasse, or sketching from life. Even though by that time haiku was being published as independent poems, it still wasn't completely removed from its original context of being an accompanying verse to a larger work. Shiki was the first to formally separate haiku from this context of collaborative poetry, as well as from Buddhism, as he was agnostic. He also coined the word haiku to finally refer to these verses, replacing the earlier term hoku. Traditional Japanese haiku consists of 3 phrases that contain a kireji, or cutting word, 17 on, or a type of Japanese phenome, which can be compared to a kind of syllable in the English context, in a 5-7-5 pattern, as well as a kigo, or seasonal reference. Depending on which kireji or cutting word is chosen and its position within the verse, it may briefly cut the stream of thought, suggesting a parallel between the preceding and following phrases, or it may provide a dignified ending, concluding the verse with a heightened sense of closure. A haiku traditionally contains a kigo, a word or phrase that symbolizes or implies the season of the poem, and this is usually taken from a sajiki, or an extensive but prescriptive list of such words. Kigo are often seen in the form of metonyms and can be difficult for those who lack Japanese cultural references to spot. Let me give you an example. It is one of Basho's most iconic haiku, and in English it roughly translates to "Old pond, frog leaps in, water's sound." In the Japanese version, you can see how the 5-7-5 structure has been created using the phonemes, and the highlighted words, the word ya serves as the kireji or the cutting word, and the word kawazu is the kigo. Kawazu actually means frog, but it is established that it is an accepted word that implies spring, and therefore it becomes the kigo, or the seasonal word that is used in the haiku. When haiku were adapted into an English form, they are formalized as a poem of 3 lines, respectively 5, 7, and 5 syllables, for a total of 17 syllables. This matches the pattern of a Japanese haiku to the extent that it's even possible to do so. It results in a poem that, although short by English poetry standards, is still a lot longer than the elegant minimalism of the Japanese. As Western poetry has been experimenting with haiku, many American poets, for example, such as Jack Kerouac, began to depart from this traditional syllable and line count in favor of depicting images as succinctly as possible. Today, the Haiku Society of America defines a haiku simply as a short poem that uses imagistic language to convey the essence of an experience of nature or the season intuitively linked to the human condition. Haiku is a powerful form because of its economic use of language to evoke a specific mood or instance. Most often occurring in the present tense, a haiku frequently depicts a moment by using a pair of distinct images that work in tandem. As you can see in these lines by Kobayashi Isa, on a branch floating down river. a cricket singing. By Isa reads, "A world of dew, and within every dewdrop, a world of struggle." In this haiku, you can see the juxtaposition of a nature image versus an observation about the human experience. Describing the Paris underground, this haiku, which is called "In a Station of the Metro," is often considered as the first one written in English, though it does not follow the 5-7-5 structure. Ezra Pound believed that the superfluous words tend to dull an image, and therefore the philosophy of haiku is perfectly up his alley. Kerouac proposed that because the English language structure is different than Japanese, the Western haiku should simply say a lot in 3 short lines in any Western language. Above all, a haiku must be very simple and free of all poetic trickery and make a little picture, and yet be as graceful and airy as a Vivaldi pastorella. In his Book of Haikus, Kerouac experimented with this formal and freestyle approach. Like the example that you see before you, many Western authors like to break with the 5-7-5 rule while still maintaining the power, simplicity, and brevity of haiku. A slightly darker take on the art of haiku, Lines on a Skull is inspired by Lord Byron's lines inscribed upon a cup formed from a skull. In this, the poet Ravi Shankar distills this late 17th century poet's words into a more modern, potent, and visceral version. Some examples of modern haiku. Take a look at them and take a moment to think about